I'm Shea Kerkhoff from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Let's talk about the elements of effective literacy instruction. Literacy, and especially reading, is at the forefront of everyone's minds right now, given the focus on the science of reading. But when someone says this seventh grader cannot read, they usually aren't referring to decoding, which is the big emphasis in the science of reading. They're usually talking about comprehension. Because of that, decoding isn't the focus of reading instruction and intervention in adolescent literacy most of the time. So what does research say should be the focus? If you look at the science of reading, you're going to find that the way it's defined in today's media and social media especially is a narrow definition of the science of reading, which is a focus on phonemic awareness and phonics. And the scientific research on reading since 1986 has found that there are actually 5 or more pillars of reading. So phonemic awareness and phonics are foundational. There's also fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, plus a key element of knowledge. So I typically refer to the 5+1 pillars of reading that should be taught explicitly and systematically. Phonemic awareness and phonics instruction is hugely important for early childhood programs. Fluency has to do with how quickly and accurately a person reads. And fluency is important because it aids comprehension. If reading is choppy, that hinders comprehension. Vocabulary has to do with understanding the words, which is important to be able to understand what we're reading. And so that's the 5+1. The phonemic awareness and phonics research shows us typically takes about 2 years of systematic and explicit instruction. And so in Missouri, we typically see that in kindergarten and first grade. And then as students are in second and third grade, perhaps it is a spiraled curriculum where it's continued to be reviewed, or there's intervention where students who need more intense instruction are given that instruction. And the elements of adolescent literacy build on this foundation of literacy in early childhood. So literacy learning never ends. It starts when we're born and we're learning language. And then there's kind of an intermediate level, which we consider maybe 4th grade through 6th grade, maybe even starting in 2nd grade, depending on some of the students, or going into 9th grade, just depending on students. Then what we're talking about today is adolescent literacy, which some people define as grades 4 through 12. Some people define as grades 6 through 12, or just whenever students are entering that middle school period and into high school. And then adult literacy. So even today, I'm learning new strategies for reading. I might pick up a statistics textbook and struggle to read that and need to build my vocabulary and in order to build comprehension. And so our learning continues. And so it's important that we think about literacy as not something that students get in early childhood and then it's over. It's something that continues to grow throughout a lifetime. So the 5 pillars of adolescent literacy, we're still going to see explicit and systematic instruction as a best practice. And we're going to see that phonemic awareness and phonics combine to form word study. So we're going to continue word study, teaching reading at the word level in adolescence, and we'll get into that a little deeper. We saw fluency before, we saw vocabulary before, we saw comprehension before, and then there's this new one, motivation, which research shows us is very, very important in adolescent literacy instruction. So just like with the 5+1 pillars of early reading, we find in adolescent literacy that explicit instruction in reading is still needed. We're working with more complex text now. And so as the complexity of the text increases, students still need strategies to help make meaning. And when I'm talking about explicit and systematic instruction, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm referring to a gradual release of responsibility that starts with the teacher, but the real goal is for students to be independent, successful readers. So I do, we do, you do is what we commonly refer to, although you might see some different models out there. I do is the teacher or a capable peer showing or doing a think aloud or demonstrating the strategy or the skill that students are going to be learning. We do is guided practice. So the teacher is there providing scaffolds, providing right in time feedback for students to get better. And the practice is a cycle of continuing to get more complex and more complex until finally students are able to be independent, confident, competent readers. And the you do signifies that we do want students to be able to use strategies or to be able to do skills on their own and to be able to transfer those skills in other contexts. So again, the big five for adolescent literacy: word study, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, motivation, and we'll go into each. The first element is word study. And in adolescent literacy, we focus on semantics plus morphology. So semantics is meaning and morphology is word parts. And word study is focusing on reading at the word level. We want to make sure that adolescents who are struggling to read at the word level know phonics. So a quick sounds check can show if there's gaps in a student's knowledge, and then the teacher can spend time one-on-one or in small groups with students who all need the same learning. Or this is a good time to call the literacy specialist for intervention. And students in middle school and high school are reading complex content texts. And so there are multi-syllable words. And so they're going to be encountering longer words, more complex words, and teaching them how to decode these multiple syllable words is really important. So when they break these multiple syllable words into their syllables and parts, if we teach them what different parts mean, like Greek roots, Latin roots, suffixes, prefixes, these can help them to then bring meaning, so the semantics, the meaning to the words. And one way is to help students who might be struggling with this is to have them underline all of the vowels and then put a slash through the different word parts, and then to slowly say the parts. So if you think about the word semantics, so you would underline the E, the A, the I, and then put a slash, man, slash, ticks. So there would be three parts, semantics, and then students would work to put that together and try to say it faster and faster until they say the whole word. And then we also can have them unpack the meaning of the parts and try to figure out what the word means. So it's really about the meaning of the words that we're focusing on. And we want students to focus on individual sounds. And then once they get that, start looking at combinations so that they can really get into those complex grade level texts. Element 2 is fluency, and this includes 3 components. So I want to make sure that we say all 3 components. So there's the accuracy, automaticity, and prosody. We want the accurate, so the number of correct words per minute. The automatic part of it is the quickness, how quickly a student can read. And then prosody means expression. And that one sometimes gets left out, but we need to make sure that students aren't reading quickly and running through punctuation marks, not adding inflection, because those are the kind of things that fluent readers do. Fluent readers stop at punctuation, they add inflection, and this helps with the meaning. So prosody is about helping with meaning. Fluency building can be practiced through repeated oral reading. That means a student would read a piece of text repeatedly, like maybe 4 times or so. The critical part, though, is that they need to be getting feedback with regard to their reading. So someone needs to listen to the student read. It could be taped. So Flipgrid is a place where students can do their oral reading, and a teacher can listen to them later. And also at the adolescent level, it's important that this be an authentic experience. So if we can give students a reason for oral reading, like reciting a poem or a speech, that way that they're practicing for a reason and they're building that fluency through an authentic task. Another aspect we want to make sure to include is a comprehension activity tied to the fluency activity, so that students aren't just focused on reading fast, but they're focused on thinking about what they're reading, because fluency and comprehension should go hand in hand. Element 3 is vocabulary. When students encounter a word that's tough, we want to encourage them to figure it out and not just skip it. So they can look at the word parts that we have talked about in word study to help them try to define the words. So we can give them some strategies for different word learning strategies. If the word parts don't help them, they can look at context clues. Then if there's a glossary, using the glossary. If not, a dictionary. We want students to become independent problem solvers when they come to a word they don't know, and we want them to define it in words, in their own words, so that they're really understanding what the concept is, and that really is aiding comprehension. And so we also can teach words directly. So direct instruction of word meaning in context towards the goal of content learning. So not just a list of 10 words that students get on Monday and they're going to be a quiz on Friday and it's not connected to anything else. The vocabulary learning should be tied to the content learning that we're asking students to do. And how we determine those words, we can think about words in 3 tiers. Tier 1 are everyday words that are familiar to most students that they probably hear in conversation or media. And we don't need to directly teach those words because students will hear those and have multiple opportunities to experience those words on their own. Tier 2 are academic words that are found across content areas. So like the word summary, that's something that we would use in different content areas. Tier 3 is discipline-specific vocabulary. So technical terms, scientific terms, terms that students are probably not hearing throughout the day and that we really need to focus on in order to learn the content that's going to be learned through the reading. And we can teach these directly to students before reading to help them comprehend what they're reading. And when we are asking students to start becoming independent word solvers, we can teach them about the word knowledge continuum. So if they come to a word, is it, I just don't know? Is it, I've heard the word, but not sure what it means? Or I recognize the word in context. I know the word well, including its various forms, definitions, and uses. So it's not just like we know it or we don't know it, but that we can build our knowledge. So if they've heard it, but they're not sure what it means, they still need to use those problem solving goals. This word knowledge continuum can also be used to differentiate learning. So you could give this to students at the beginning of a unit with all of the words for the unit. And if they know the word well, including its various forms, definitions, and uses, then they, can skip that word and maybe it's not something that they have to study for that unit. Comprehension, this element probably gets the most attention because that's the point of reading. It's for comprehension. Comprehension is reading for understanding, making meaning from text. And readers do this actively. It's an active process. And we as teachers can help students before reading, during reading, and after reading to aid comprehension. So before reading, readers make connections to the text. They think about the title or the topic and maybe what they already know about it. This activates prior knowledge. Readers also set a purpose for reading. So are they reading it in order to get the main idea, or are they reading it for entertainment? Those are 2 different tasks or purposes for reading. And the purpose of reading is important to see if we are actually comprehending, if we're meeting our purpose. So teachers can set the purpose of reading for students. I think it's important to make sure that students know what the topic of the lesson is and what's the purpose of reading. If it's an information informational text and you want students to understand the timeline of events before getting into a discussion the next day, then explaining to students that that is the purpose, because the strategy that would go with that purpose is probably to create a timeline. So a different purpose would necessitate different strategies. And then students can also learn that they can set their own purpose for reading. Is there something they want to know about this topic? And then they can read to see if the reading is relevant to their question. So this becomes important as students start doing their own research and inquiry. If they are trying to research a topic, they can set the purpose. I want to learn more about X. And then as they're reading, okay, well, is this text teaching me about X? Is it what I need? And so we can teach strategies during reading as well. So monitoring comprehension. If I'm not understanding what I'm reading, I can go back and reread, or I can slow down, or do I need to look up some words? Summarizing works for informational text, but not so much for narrative text. So in narrative text, maybe we're looking more for character development or plot structure. And then after reading, we can help students think about and expand on the ideas from the text. So when we're teaching reading comprehension, it's important to select a text at students' level when introducing the strategy. If we give them a text that's too hard, then they might just be focusing on making meaning from the text more than trying to see how the strategy works. But if it's too easy, then they don't need the strategy, and so they're not seeing the utility of the strategy. We can model different strategies like generating and answering questions, predicting, visualizing. We can show that strategies work on different texts. So you can, as a grade level team, perhaps you have comprehension strategies that you're all going to use and you're going to use different texts, or even in your own classroom, you can show a strategy can be used across different texts. But students need more than just explicit and systematic reading comprehension strategy instruction. At Adolescent Literacy, students need dialogic and collaborative reading experiences. So they need to engage in discussions, dialogue, discussions where they're giving and taking of ideas, and collaborative. So reading with partners or in small groups where they're making meaning collectively and constructing knowledge together. It's also important to talk about the goal of the strategy isn't just to fill in a worksheet. In fact, I don't use the word worksheet with my students. We talk about the goal of the strategy is to comprehend the text, and so it's a tool. It's also important to teach metacognition. So these are those comprehension monitoring strategies. You might be surprised if you ask your students, what do you do if you don't understand a text, that they say they just move on. But in fact, there's things that readers can do. They can reread, they can read more slowly, as I was saying before. And so there's a whole repertoire of comprehension monitoring strategies that fall under the term metacognitive strategies. So we can teach metacognition to think about our thinking as we're reading. Comprehension should be taught in and across content areas. So different disciplines utilize different text structures. So a narrative, beginning, middle, end. But we also have compare and contrast. If you think about social studies or in science, cause and effect, or problem solution is often the strategy. And so we can teach students, we can explicitly teach different text structures, but then also give them opportunities to practice and become independent using analyzing text structure to make meaning. And graphic organizers are really, really great as comprehension strategies. Provide opportunities for students to close read and apply information to make an argument, so that they're using their reading to construct knowledge for authentic purposes, and that they are learning to really analyze text closely to extrapolate the meaning and the information that is important for them in order to make informed decisions and to make arguments. And then provide strategies for students to use during reading. So I see a lot of times teachers do the before, they activate the prior knowledge, they do the direct instruction of the vocabulary, and then after reading, they have discussion and have questions. But during reading, we can support students as well. The last element of the big five for adolescent literacy is motivation. So research shows us that there are many instructional practices that teachers can do to help students build motivation for reading and writing, and for engaging in the classroom. We can think about these as the 8 C's of adolescent motivation for reading. Confidence has to do with students' belief that they can succeed. So when we model strategies and give students strategies, help them become independent with strategies, that gives them confidence that they can accomplish the task. Especially for students who may have struggled as reading, by the time they're in adolescence, it's really important to build their confidence that they can do this and that you can help them tackle these complex, challenging texts. Challenge. So adolescents want to be challenged. Actually, being challenged and having to think and to learn new things is motivating. However, if it's too challenging, that's when our confidence might start to fall, and then we may not be as motivated. So it's a Goldilocks approach, not too easy, but not too hard, getting that challenge level just right. And then also with adolescents, making sure, that the materials don't look babyish, that they look like they're challenging and appropriate for the grade level. Choice. So giving students some autonomy in their learning, helping them to have choice and control over their learning, helping them set purpose for reading, to have choice over the topics that they want to read about. Collaboration. Adolescents are social beings, so when they can work with others and engage in rich dialogue and work together to construct meaning, that's really engaging and motivating for them. And then consequence is about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So we want to help students build intrinsic motivation for reading, helping them to see that strategies are for the purpose of understanding what we read and growing as readers, not just like we're completing a worksheet and that's it. Also intrinsic motivation that we can grow as readers, that literacy is something that develops over a lifetime, and that at any point a person can get better at reading. So it's never too late. And thinking about how we can support each other as a community of readers. And then culturally responsive has to do with the making sure that the curriculum and the texts we're choosing reflect and represent the identities of students in our class. Those all help increase motivation. So as I mentioned, all of the instructional practices I presented today were from a research base. The Best Practices in Adolescent Literacy Instruction is a book I highly recommend. The Reading Next document. There's also a Writing Next document that's quite good. There's a Institute for Education Studies What Works Clearinghouse document on improving adolescent literacy, reaping the reward of the Reading for Understanding initiative. I also use the Carnegie Reading in the Disciplines, and great meta-analysis that's pictured there that talks about the big five for students in adolescence is the Effective Instruction for Adolescent Struggling Readers.